Hello everyone, my name is Nowhere and I think Sonic Heroes has some genius design. But before we start, let's clarify something. You know how there are things like reviews, retrospectives, essays, analytical videos and so on? Well, this is going to include all of them, but be none of them specifically. In this video and series, I'd like to share my experience of games and the like, with all its biases and subjectivity included. Sometimes I will dig deep in analyzing gameplay, for example, but sometimes I'll also share personal memory. I'll mainly cover the Sonic games I've played over the past years. I will give my opinion and try to explain them as much as possible, but in the end, my assessments remain just my personal opinion. Sonic Heroes was my first Sonic game. As such, I will talk about my experience with the game, both as a kid and as an adult, which may or may not contrast sometimes. With that out of the way, welcome to Nowhere Talks a Bunch about Sonic, starting with Sonic Heroes. I must have heard this song a million times by now, like many people who played Sonic Heroes. Getting right into the game, I instantly saw 4 teams. The team formation was something unlike any other game I had played before as a kid. I usually played as one character, either in a 2D or a 3D space, and they would not accelerate like these characters. But even with that, I didn't have a single problem mastering control over the characters. The game has 4 teams. Now, let's start with Team Sonic.
Let's blast through with Sonic speed!
Okay!
Alright!
I'll be using Team Sonic to go over most of the gameplay and then talk about the differences between the teams. Starting in Seaside Hill, the characters are already running. It's a relatively easy stage and as a little kid, I definitely needed such a stage. I finished it with some trial and error and got familiar with the controls before facing the first boss. Defeating Dr. Eggman in a boss fight took a while when I was a kid, but now as an adult, it takes only a few seconds. After this, the game would proceed to many other stages. One thing I absolutely love about Sonic Heroes are the places each team visits. We find ourselves on a beach, in a palace, a city, a forest, a spooky castle, high in the air, and more. Even within the stages, there's a sense of progression both in environments as well as in difficulty. One time we're in a lush forest, with frogs, and there are a lot of big spaces to traverse. The next stage consists of what feels like a much denser forest with stronger enemies, the same frogs, but also hostile ones, and less big open spaces to traverse in. All this combined with the theming of each stage is what made the game memorable and a lot of fun. But what about the gameplay? There are 2 things I'd like to highlight regarding the gameplay: traversal and combat, both of which are best explained using the very first stage. The main gameplay consists of working together in teams, with each team member having their own strengths and weaknesses. Their attributes being speed, power and fly. In this case, being attributed to Sonic, Knuckles and Tails respectively. Imagine it is your first time playing the game. When entering Seaside Hill, the game shows you running at a fast pace. You instantly know how fast you can get, and when slowing down, you can get used to the controls here. There are no enemies, no super hard obstacles, automated character switches, etc. However, after a while, you run into a few enemies in the front and what seems like a dead end in the back. You can defeat the enemies in whichever way you like and get to learn how to defeat basic enemies. After that though, what to do? The game nudges you into using Knuckles, the power character, which is the most logical option as a first timer. On the other hand, you can also choose to fly over with Tails, for example. This means that within 30 seconds, the game shows an obstacle that can be overcome in multiple ways, and it is up to you to figure out how to proceed. The game nudges you, but doesn't force anything on you. This holds up for the rest of the game and is a big part of why I like traversal in Sonic Heroes. Throughout the whole game, there are multiple pathways, multiple ways to use every character, multiple ways to proceed inside and outside of combat, and you're the one in charge. Consider this example later in the game. At some point, in Lost Jungle, you come across a frog, introduced in the previous stage. It rains, making the jungle come alive, and you have the option to take the upper path. Once there, the characters see another frog that is introduced in this stage, the kind that kills life. It is obvious that you do not want to go near that frog, but it is not a big problem if you do. There are some goodies up there, but you can choose to traverse on land. There are a few small platforms here, surrounded by water, and again, you can choose to fly over it, use the platform, or jump from above if you happen to be up there. You see an enemy, and there's a team blast if you go back a little. You can also choose to ignore the enemy completely, at the cost of a possible level up. But I'll get into that later. And once you use the flower to experience a short spectacle while traveling further, you immediately get multiple choices and pathways again. It is again up to you to figure out how you want to proceed. The player is constantly in charge, and even in short sections where they are not completely in charge, like when using the flower for example, they still have some control over it, getting the goodies as a reward. And this is the case throughout the entire game. Take a look at this image in Frog Forest. You are thrown into the air, and while landing, you can choose how you want to move forward. You can go left, right, up. You can choose which character to use and when. And there are many more examples. It is up to you. In short, Sonic Heroes' traversal gives the player freedom to figure out how they'd like to proceed. This gives the game a feeling of a playground for you to just have fun with. Make use of the physics and the strength of each teammate, and there are many ways to proceed. Upon replaying, you get familiar with the many options available to you and forge your own perceived optimal path. A path that you created for yourself. Whenever I see someone else play this game, whether they are familiar with the game or not, they always make many different choices compared to a different player. As a result, every player will have their own experience and their own path that they'd like to take. How you play also depends on the level of each character. And that brings us to the combat system. For this, let's return to Seaside Hill. Remember those enemies in the very beginning? Like traversal, it is up to the player how to proceed, and the enemies are another obstacle of the game. You can choose either Sonic, Knuckles or Tails. At this point, it makes the most sense to use either Sonic or Knuckles. The first enemies are basic and no big challenge. But the further you go, the more diverse the enemies become, and the more some options become either more or less effective. There are grounded enemies, flying enemies, enemies with shields, enemies with guns, lasers, huge hammers, cannons, and more and so on. They come in all kinds of combinations. And you, the player, has many options to choose from, all with their own costs and benefits. All this already gives you many ways to choose how to proceed, but the best part of the combat system is that this system is not static. There's one variable that can change what is the better or worse solution throughout the game on a constant basis. But never to the detriment of the player, the level system. Each character has 3 levels and will go up 1 level whenever they pass a checkpoint, find a level up somewhere in the stage, or in an enemy. This makes the characters more powerful and thus more useful. Sonic's homing attack will do more damage and get a wind box. As a result, he can take care of shields that Knuckles may have a hard time with. Knuckles in turn will get more powerful and can take care of enemies much, and I mean much easier. And Tails can take care of flying enemies very easily, for example. All these elements complement the traversal of the game. Consider the previous example in Frog Forest. Depending on your level of each character, you might be more confident about taking the path to the left. For example, if you have a very strong power character. This shows that traversal and combat complement each other and have a reciprocal relationship. One influences the other and vice versa. When you are traveling, you might take a different path depending on the combat variables like confidence in your own ability to take care of enemies or the number of levels each character has. The other way around, the combat influences traversal because the more enemies you defeat, the easier it is for you to move around. Both traversal and combat exist to complement each other. The level system does not only aid in combat, but also traversal. For example, Sonic can take care of enemy shields while also being able to catch balls faster, and Tails can one-shot flying enemies. In other words, traversal and combat give the player loads of options to make the best of it in their playground. I find this gameplay to be a very satisfying experience that also results in gameplay surrounding speed. The better the player gets at any of the earlier mentioned mechanics, the faster they go as a result. It is up to the player to make what they perceive as the best use of all mentioned mechanics. This is something a newcomer can enjoy on their own, and if they feel lost, the game nudges but does not force the player in a general direction with, for example, TV screens or signs. As a kid, that's exactly what I did. For anyone interested in further exploring the mechanics, mastery of the game is extremely satisfying. As an adult, that's what I do now. I think this reciprocal relationship between traversal and combat, taken together with player freedom and accessibility, is genius gameplay design. You know, the title. And that's just the core gameplay, which gets enhanced by the appeal of the characters. Another topic I absolutely adored in Sonic Heroes are the relationships within teams. The team's chemistry, both within cutscenes as well as in-game, was fun to follow and the characters truly came alive to me. In-game, the way the characters spoke to each other and me as a player captivated me. While whizzing by the lush environments, they would make jokes, comment on the environments, all the while sucking me into the game, as if I was there with them. I know that as an adult, it is easy to see these conversations simply as people in the real world saying a few lines, not as actual characters that are alive and experiencing this adventure. But I love the characters interacting like this. On the other hand, I can see that some people might not like the characters speaking, and I think an option to turn dialogue off would be a nice addition for some. The same holds for the ranking system. The appeal of the teams also shines during the cutscenes. One of my favorite cutscenes in the whole series, aside from these ones I'll be talking about in another video, is the one right before Casino Park. After having fought Team Rose, Team Sonic is having a short interaction. The lighthearted exchanges, the music, the overall aesthetics give this cutscene an overall feeling of adventure that has both the fate of the world at stake, while also having fun on the road towards the villain. Even with this being my first Sonic game, cutscenes like these made me feel that the characters knew each other well and for a long time, and in turn that made me feel like I knew them for a long time as well. It's short but effective and transitions smoothly into the gameplay.
Amy sure doesn't give up that easy.
What is this place? Sure is bright here.
We got some time. Feeling lucky?
Sonic, we only have 24 hours left.
Okay, let's go.
Are there any negatives to the gameplay then? Of course there are, since no game is perfect. Some game mechanics and controls don't work as well as they should. For example, as much as I love the casino stages, rolling as a pinball doesn't control or feel good, nor does switching rails or falling off the platform because the player was using the power character too much. As a result, dying in Sonic Heroes can sometimes feel unfair, and dying because of such a design is especially frustrating if the player is aiming for an A rank. There are a few more examples like the special stages and team boss fights, however I'll get into those later. Oh, there's one more thing I would like to highlight regarding the enemies. Aren't they adorable? I love the personalities these enemies have. They already have a cuteness in their design, but this is also communicated in their behavior. They are asleep, get flustered when you get near them, and in a cutscene they seem genuinely scared in a comedic way. I almost feel bad for destroying them. But you know what, back to the overall gameplay. The game on its own is satisfying to play with the whole reciprocal thing I talked about earlier. And then you get to the bosses. Well, they play a bit differently. As a kid, I thought the bosses in this game were great. There are three kinds of bosses. Eggman boss fights against machines and pilots, Eggman boss fights with regular enemies, and team encounters. Fighting against Eggman was always a thrill since he is the main antagonist. He is the one building all these big structures, and as a result, he seems genuinely like a threat. Eggman also always had this comedic side to him while being threatening at the same time, which seems fitting to me since Sonic himself has both a bit of a cuteness to his design, while also being strong and dependable. But I want to talk about Sonic and Eggman's designs and character in another video. The team encounters were great for the interaction between them, and to see how silly those can be.
Man, who are those creeps over there?
Especially the rivalry between Sonic and Shadow and the two teams in general was great to see. However, as an adult, these bosses are a drag to go through. Eggman machine encounters are repetitive and not engaging. I still feel some satisfaction from going through them quickly, but not so much, and I usually wish to end it quickly so I can get to the next stage. The team encounters are sort of random, although I still like the idea of teams fighting each other. To my opinion, it is poorly executed. The main problem I have is that there are no cues for what works or should work, resulting in a lot of confusion both when hitting and getting hit. On a more positive note, the Eggman encounters with regular enemies are even way more fun as an adult. As a kid, I would go through loads of enemies, and it was always a thrill seeing what hurdle of enemies Eggman would send next. It was a fun challenge, and that was it. Nowadays, I have loads of fun figuring out how to quickly go through the enemies. It is especially satisfying getting an A rank, being tested for your knowledge on both the strengths and weaknesses of the enemies and your own team, depending on the level of each of your characters, and act accordingly. The only problem is the flip side. If you don't know how to figure out how to easily dispatch of the enemies, or don't want to bother, then it can become a drag to go through. I use Team Sonic to go over all the gameplay mechanics in the game, and will now go over the differences between the teams.
I'm counting on you guys!
Affirmative.
I love Team Dark. consisting of Shadow the Hedgehog, Rouge the Bat, and E123 Omega. Since this was my first Sonic game, I had no context whatsoever with Shadow's and Rouge's past. All I knew is that these are 3 people that on the surface might not seem like a team with a bond such as Team Sonic, especially because when compared with any other team, they don't seem to have aligned goals but more so their own goals. Shadow wants to learn about his past, Rouge is after Eggman's treasure, and Omega wants to
destroy, kill, worthless consumer models.
Yeah, that. Despite all that, they will grow close together during their adventure, which is shown even more in a later game I hope to talk about in the future. As for gameplay, there are a few differences. Team Dark has stages that are longer and have more enemies, and a Team Blast freezes time for a short time, which can also be used in the team battles to freeze the other teams. As a kid, I was a big fan of Sonic and Shadow's rivalry. As an adult though, I see that there's not that much going on between them in this game specifically. However, one thing that I like is small details to show that rivalry. Like how Sonic and Shadow's auto pose in the menu is mirrored to each other, and that Team Dark stands above Team Sonic, similar to Sonic and Shadow's encounters in SA2. Speaking of similarities with SA2, I never noticed Shadow's Chaos Control pose the exact same as when he first used Chaos Control in SA2. Also, why do we need to collect the green emerald if Shadow already has it? Oh well, it doesn't matter. The last thing I want to say about Team Dark is that I like how both Shadow and Omega are connected with Dr. Eggman in a different way than Team Sonic. Whenever Team Sonic encounters Eggman, there's an epic good versus evil atmosphere, which is fine on its own and I wouldn't have it any other way in the game. However, Team Dark gives an opportunity to shed a different light on the relationship between the heroes and the villain, which is utilized well in my opinion. There's a sorrowful atmosphere every time Team Dark encounters Eggman, and that is because both Shadow and Omega feel Eggman as something they need. It's as if Eggman has a hold on Shadow and Omega until they achieve their goals. It's as if fate has bound Shadow and Omega to Eggman, and this connection to Eggman that no other character in the game appears to have is likely why Shadow and Omega seem emphasized with Metal Sonic in the end of the game. Their relationship with Eggman also sheds a different, more menacing light on Dr. Eggman as a villain, as he causes clear pain and struggle to both Shadow and Omega. Even though at first glance, Rouge seems to be just after Eggman's treasure, it is clear she cares about Shadow, as is shown in the last cutscene. In short, I like Team Dark from a gameplay perspective, as they essentially give the player a hard mode, and from a narrative point of view, because they have character attributes that, in this game specifically, other characters do not offer. This gives both Team Sonic's lighthearted adventure, as well as Team Dark's similar but more sorrowful adventure, meaning within the game.
We're up! You can count on me!
Okay, here we go!
Team Rose, consisting of Amy Rose, Cream the Rabbit and Big the Cat, is essentially the game's easy mode, with much shorter stages and much less difficult enemy encounters. In addition, their Team Blast fills much faster, giving them invincibility for a short period of time, level ups to all 3 members, and gives them a shield. I don't have as big of a fondness for the connections between Amy, Cream and Big as I have for Team Sonic or Team Dark, but I feel they go along well with one another. It's great to see Amy taking the role of the leader, and I like the addition of Cream to the cast, who made her first appearance in Sonic Mega Collection and later in Sonic Advance 2, and now got her first 3D outing. I've never been a big fan of Big, pun intended, but I also don't dislike him. Other than that, I don't have much to say about Team Rose. The story isn't that compelling to me with all of them seeking someone. I admire that, but there just isn't that much to say about it. I do like how Metal Sonic copies Chaos data from Froggy, harkening back to SA1, giving some continuation from the series alongside some lines like Amy mentioning the egg carrier. Something I like from Team Sonic and Team Dark as well, with for example Knuckles mentioning mushrooms on his island and Shadow mentioning space as something that's important to him.
Here we go!
Yeah, let's go!
Team Chaotix, consisting of Espio the Chameleon, Vector the Crocodile and Charmy Bee, are a bit different than the other teams. They have a much more mission-based structure to the gameplay. As a kid, I never liked their stages, while as an adult, I do have some appreciation for them. For starters, I like that the developers did something more refreshing to their gameplay than simply doing the same thing as with the other teams. For example, I enjoy their stealth mission because it's fun on their own as well as different than the gameplay of the other teams. But overall, I don't find them that much fun and I don't enjoy most of their fetch quests. And going through the game for the 4th time makes me wonder if the game would be better off with 3 teams instead. That said, I do enjoy the chemistry between the team members, Right from the first cutscene, it is clear that they are 3 goofballs, and the fact that their entire story revolves around them trying to make rent is just hilarious. Even their Team Blast shows this. While all the other teams are having these poses and powers bringing down every enemy, Team Chaotix's Team Blast is just them being a big goof. As kids, me and my siblings had this idea that they receive rings when they use their Team Blast because their music is so bad, the enemies are praying them to stop. They are the comic relief in this game, and in that sense, they offer something to the game that is not seen anywhere else. Their bantering to each other is also funny, like Vector reminding Charmy that Charmy can't be afraid to fly since he's a bee.
Flying this high makes me dizzy!
You're a bee! You're supposed to be used to flying, aren't you?
However, their gameplay being required and sometimes being tedious is what reduces my appreciation of them. And I haven't even discussed their missions yet. Speaking of which, let's talk about the missions. I generally like the missions of the game. For starters, I like how each team's missions play into the gameplay of their particular team. Team Sonic is, let's say, vanilla Sonic Heroes gameplay. So their missions revolve around one of Sonic's core attributes, being fast. Team Dark has lots of enemy encounters, so their missions require them to beat lots of enemies. Team Rose is all about collecting rings, which plays into the fact that they can easily get shields and invincibility from their Team Blast, making it feel fair when you actually lose those rings, since Team Rose gives more than enough opportunity to not lose them. Team Chaotix has missions which are even more difficult than their initial gameplay. We'll get into that. The best thing about the missions is that they are not required to complete the game as a whole. They simply give that extra challenge that a player may be looking for. Sure, they are required to finish the game for 100%, but if you would be planning to do that in the first place, I'd say you would first need to enjoy the game enough to want that in the first place. It's the perfect solution. If you're looking for something extra, here it is. If you don't like it, don't bother. Beat the final boss and roll credits. For me, the most satisfying missions are from Team Sonic. Getting an A rank on the missions essentially means optimizing as much as you can given what you learned from the game mechanics and the stages. This requires the player to manage the speed, level ups, how to optimally engage in combat and all that good stuff I talked about earlier. Giving a very satisfying experience once clearing the stage and receiving that A rank. The designers had this in mind, since in order to receive an A rank, Team Sonic requires you to optimize all variables from the game, while Team Dark, for example, only grades time for defeating a certain number of enemies. This is a decision that makes sense, because Team Dark's missions take a while to finish, but you don't have to worry too much if you die one time, since only time is measured. Dying still results in the levels of each team member resetting, and thus it still gives the player an incentive to stay alive. Also, the fact that only time is measured means that Team Blast, which freezes time, can be useful, as in some places freezing time forces the player to wait, while in other places it literally gives you extra time to receive a higher score, incentivizing you to use a Team Blast wisely. And now we arrive at the missions of Team Chaotix. In short, I like some challenge in the missions, but Team Chaotix took it way too far. Bingo Highway is a mission I didn't finish without a guide, and even then, receiving an A rank is made way too precise and simply not fun. The same applies to most of the other missions. It seems the developers knew how difficult these missions were, since I finished Mystic Mansion's mission in 17 minutes and still received an A rank. As if the game's telling me, you know what, this was so difficult, let me give you an A rank just for completing it. I saw one YouTube comment once where someone mentioned it took them 26 minutes to complete the mission, and even then they received an A rank. I haven't checked it, but although I appreciate the sentiment, I would have wished for Team Chaotix's gameplay to be fun and engaging in its own right. Furthermore, I don't have anywhere else to talk about it, so I'll take this moment to talk about Super Hard Mode. I think Super Hard Mode is a fantastic mode. All the stuff I talked about earlier, managing your level ups, Team Blast, speed, all that good stuff really flourishes in Super Hard Mode. The best thing is, again, that players who like the game and are intimately familiar with the game's mechanics can go wild in this mode, while players who wouldn't bother don't have to play the mode to finish the game's main stages and story. I played it for the first time not too long ago, since I never A-ranked every single level in the game before, which is a requirement, and it was extremely satisfying figuring out how I would like to proceed, how I would like to tackle the stage's obstacles and figure out how to engage in combat depending on the team's members' levels, amongst other things. In all, I just like this mode and would love to see such a hard mode in other games as well. Not just Sonic games, just all games in general. Before we go to the final boss and conclusion, I'd like to talk about the special stages. So, The special stages are one of the few things I outright dislike about the game. If you played the game, this probably does not come as a surprise to you. The special stages are a place to get some extra lives for Act 1 and the Chaos Emerald for Act 2. You can gain access to the special stages by picking up a key locked in the cage. Key locked in the cage. Usually it's kind of the other way around. Oh well, Knuckles doesn't care either way. Anyway, let's start with the positive aspect. You run through a pipe that looks out of this world with catchy music and wonderful colors all over the place. Sometimes the chows in the balloon come by and help you. I also like the aspect that as the game progresses and the environments become more menacing, so do the pipes in the background in the special stages. But even with all that, as a kid, I already felt conflicted. My first impression was that the special stages were exciting and surprising at the end of the level, since I wasn't aware how to activate them. I liked the first few special stages, but as the game progressed, the problems with the controls came to the forefront and I didn't like them so much anymore, with all the obstacles that felt impossible to avoid. In particular, the last few special stages are frustrating to go through. I cannot control the characters in a consistent way. Fun fact, as I played the game on a PC, I remember that a number of times I would go up to the ceiling and accelerate myself toward the Chaos Emerald. I guess that there's some kind of glitch going on here. That was a huge relief, but now as an adult I play the game on a GameCube and it doesn't work, and it shouldn't have to if the controls were just fine. I personally find the problems with the controls a huge bummer because I really like everything else in the special stages. It looks fun, you get bonuses, you see the chows and they are short. If I could use the controls appropriately, these might be my favorite special stage in the series. But as it is, I usually hope for them to be over as soon as possible. So, we made it all the way through the game and collected all Chaos Emeralds. What now? Before we truly conclude, I haven't talked about the actual stages themselves, and that's because I wanted to mostly focus on the gameplay mechanics and characters. As a whole, I like the stages, and I'll briefly go over them now. I think Seaside Hill and Ocean Palace are a great introduction to the game. Next, Grand Metropolis and Power Plant have a wonderful atmosphere. Casino Park and Bingo Highway have appealing theming with the giant casino assets, and Casino Park in particular has one of my favorite tracks. Sometimes the controls in the pinball parts are annoying, as I pointed out, but other than that, I like them. Rail Canyon and Bullet Station give a sense of urgency and show that things are getting more serious. Frog Forest is one of my all-time favorites in the series. I love the music, and together with the rain and the giant forest in the background, especially at the end, it has a wonderful atmosphere. Lost Jungle is a good follow-up, getting the player more deeply into the jungle. Hang Castle and Mystic Mansion are, in my opinion, some of the best theming in the series. I think Sonic Heroes as a whole has some of the best theming in general, but I feel Hang Castle and Mystic Mansion really highlight that. For example, with how spooky the stages and its mechanics are, like walking upside down, walking on invisible platforms, and seeing the enemy spawn from the paintings. Egg Fleet and Final Fortress are some of the best final levels in the series. Going through all of Eggman's ships in Egg Fleet and destroying them in the process is a satisfying experience, and seeing how ridiculously over the top Eggman can be with his introduction and building this many ships is both comedic and a welcome challenge. Final Fortress in particular is a good final challenge, with all the hard enemies and obstacles to overcome. With that out of the way, let's see what the final story is. A cutscene starts with where we left off with Team Chaotix, where Vector asks Dr. Eggman who locked him up. I like the ominous transition with Eggman pausing before he speaks up and then fading into the next scene. There is a scene with Metal Sonic transforming, and I adore the personality of the robots shining through here again, and then we get into some gameplay. As a whole, I think the last story is a nice wrap up of the full story with all the teams working together. We get a conclusion to both of Team Chaotix's quests since they know who trapped Eggman, and Team Rose's quest as they now know that Metal Sonic was pretending to be Sonic and took Froggy and Chocolat. I also wonder whether it is a coincidence that the final boss in this game is a lizard-like creature, just as the final boss in the last game. It's as if whoever is mimicking great power ends up like a lizard. It's probably just coincidence. In the end, the teams attack Metal Overlord, which I thematically like, but from a gameplay perspective, I don't find it anything special. We then get a cutscene where all 7 Chaos Emeralds are used. Was it worth going through all those special stages? I say yes, because Super Sonic is a great transformation, and the transition from Sonic to Super Sonic is well done. That what happens to the other characters though is too bad. As a kid, this transformation baffled me. Super Sonic was looking all great and shiny and stuff, but Tails and Knuckles just get these bubble things. And this was even before I knew they already had their own super forms established. Oh well, I guess it makes Sonic more special. You could say this game is about teamwork, and that Sonic just goes and snatches all the cool looking powers. Anyway, Team Super Sonic fights Metal Overlord. I like many things about this final boss fight. First off, the setting. Flying up high in the stormy clouds is a fitting stage for a final boss. The music from Crash 40 is great, and I also like that the other characters cheer for you as you fight the boss.
Sonic, you can do it!
Can you hear me, Sonic? Regular attacks are useless now! Attack it using Team Blast!
It's a thing other games do as well, and I liked it just as much there as it was done here. It's even more fitting here, since the game is all about teamwork. Also, did they just throw a ship at us? I further like that Sonic says the title of the song playing in the background.
Let's show him what we're made of!
To wrap up, I like this boss fight. The fact that you can only hit him using Team Blast is like a message, saying that even if someone is an almighty overlord, as a team, you can achieve more. In conclusion, I love this game. Sonic Heroes was my first Sonic game and it got me hooked to the series for life. As a kid, Sonic Heroes was already a great big adventure from beginning to end, and as an adult, I can appreciate the gameplay mechanics even more. It has its flaws, sure, like any game, but to me, the experience of Sonic Heroes is an adventure I'll never forget. Let me know in the comments what you think the next game will be, and tell me what you think of the format of this video. If you liked the video, consider subscribing, hitting that like button and all that YouTube stuff. Also a big shout out to Baghi-Misfortune for drawing yours truly and the thumbnail. Check out our gallery, she's really talented. Just look at how cute Sonic is. See you all next time.